My profession is a delicate one.
Most people, when they hear what I do, conjure images from films. A man in black, suspended by wires, navigating a maze of laser beams. The reality is far less glamorous and infinitely more cerebral. I am not a common thief. I am a specialist in acquisition and recovery. When a priceless artifact vanishes into a private collection, when a piece of history is sequestered by avarice, when art is held hostage by ego, a certain type of client seeks me out. They don't call the police, because often, their own hands aren't clean. They call me
Julian Croft.
And I retrieve what was lost. Or more accurately, what they desire. My father, a man of less scrupulous and more direct methods, called it stealing. You can wrap it in silk words, son, he'd say, a grin playing on his lips. But at the end of the day, you're just a high-class burglar with a better vocabulary. He wasn't wrong. But vocabulary is everything. It's the difference between a hostile takeover and a corporate raid, between an intelligence asset and a spy. I provide a service that operates in the gray spaces left by law and morality. It requires patience, research, and an almost pathological attention to detail. It is, above all else, a solitary business. And I, for the most part, preferred it that way. The job that led me to the Blackwood Manor began as they all do, with a discreet inquiry and a meeting in a place with no cameras. The client introduced himself only as Mr. Silas. He was a man assembled from expensive impersonal parts, a tailored Italian suit the color of a stormy sky, a Swiss watch that cost more than my car, and a pair of polished Oxfords that had never touched a public sidewalk. His face was a mask of placid neutrality, but his eyes, small and dark, missed nothing. They scanned me not as a person, but as a tool, assessing my capabilities and potential for failure.
I have a retrieval for you, monsieur.
Croft, he said, his voice as smooth and cold as the marble tabletop between us.
A délicate maté.
They always are, Mr. Silas. He allowed a flicker of a smile, a brief crack in the facade. Indeed, the target is an artifact. An obsidian scrying mirror, known as the Oculus of Nyx. He slid a leather-bound folio across the table. Inside were high-resolution photographs and a dossier. The object was beautiful in a severe, unsettling way. A perfect circle of polished black volcanic glass, about the size of a dinner plate, held in an intricate silver frame wrought to look like intertwined, thorny branches. There were no jewels, no gold, just the stark contrast of polished night and tarnished silver. It's currently in the possession of one Alistair Blackwood, Silas continued. He resides in Beacon Hill. I assume you're familiar with the area. I nodded, my eyes still fixed on the photographs.
Beacon Hill, Boston.
A neighborhood of old money and older secrets, its gaslit cobblestone streets and stately brick townhouses forming a fortress against the modern world. It was the kind of place where lineage mattered more than liquidity. Blackwood is a recluse, Silas said, anticipating my next question.
Et inherited the family fortune and the family Manor.
He rarely leaves. He has no business, no social profile. For all intents and purposes, he is a ghost who lives in a museum. And he acquired the Oculus how? I asked, looking up. Through means that are not your concern, Silas replied coolly. My client wishes for its return.
The provenance is complicated.
Let us just say Mr. Blackwood is not its rightful owner.
The subtext was clear.
Silas's client was likely the person Blackwood had stolen it from.
A thief stealing from a thief.
The serpent eating its own tail. It was the bedrock of my entire industry. The fee will be substantial, Silas said, naming a figure that made my breath catch. It was enough to retire on. Enough to make a man careless. Half upon acceptance of the contract. Half upon delivery of the Oculus. Unmarked.
Intraçable. He studied the dossier.
Blueprints of the manor, obtained from city archives. Notes on Blackwood's sparse routine, grocery deliveries, a weekly groundskeeping service, no other staff. An analysis of the property's antiquated security system. It was thorough,
Professionnel.
but something felt off. A job this clean for a fee this high, it set off alarm bells. High reward always meant high risk, and the risk here wasn't immediately apparent. What is this thing really? I asked, tapping the photo of the Oculus. More than just an antique mirror. Silas's gaze hardened. It is a historical artifact of significant value. That is all you need to know, Mr. Croft. Your talent is in acquisition, not appraisal. Can you do the job, or not? Against my better judgment, against the cold knot of apprehension forming in my gut, I heard myself speak the word that would seal my fate.
Yes.
Excellent, he said, standing. The first payment will be in your account within the hour. I expect to hear from you within the week. Do not fail.
Monsieur.
Blackwood is a man who values his privacy and his possessions very highly. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the city's anonymous throng, leaving me with the folio and the chilling sensation that I had just signed a contract with a phantom. The 2 weeks that followed were a masterclass in tedium, just as my father had always promised. I lived and breathed Alistair Blackwood. From a rented room in a brownstone across the street, I mapped the rhythm of his life with a pair of high-powered binoculars and a telephoto lens. Silas was right. Blackwood was a ghost. I saw him only in brief flashes, a silhouette in a window, a glimpse of a pale, severe face as he accepted a delivery at his massive oak door. He was tall, gaunt, with a shock of premature silver hair that fell across his forehead. He moved with a kind of predatory grace, a man entirely at home in the cavernous, silent world he had built for himself. The Blackwood Manor wasn't a home, it was a mausoleum. A 4-story federal-style behemoth of brick and stone, it crouched on the corner of the street like some ancient, slumbering beast. Its windows were dark eyes, watching the world with a sleepy malevolence. Ivy crawled up its walls like skeletal fingers. The place had a reputation in the neighborhood. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones. They said it was haunted, that the Blackwood family had been involved in dark dealings for generations, that strange lights were sometimes seen in the uppermost windows late at night. The usual ghost stories that cling to old houses like damp. I dismissed them as folklore. My concerns were with the living, not the dead. I documented the patterns. The security patrol that drove by at 11:05 p.m. and 3:05 a.m. The slight sag in the wrought iron fence at the rear of the property, hidden by overgrown rose bushes. The way the wind, coming off the Charles River, would sometimes rattle the sash of a third-floor library window that seemed to lack a proper latch. That was my way in. Small, overlooked details. The chinks in the armor of the wealthy. But as the days bled into nights, I began to notice things that didn't fit the patterns.
Anomalie.
Sometimes, through my lens, a reflection in one of the manor's windows would seem delayed. A passing car would appear in the glass a second after it had already gone. Once, I could have sworn I saw a shape, a tall, slender distortion in the air, move across the glass of the library window, even though the room behind it was pitch black. I'd blink, adjust the focus, and it would be gone. I blamed fatigue, tricks of the light, the warp of old glass. My rational mind fabricated a dozen logical explanations because the alternative was unthinkable. The night of the job, a cold front had moved in, draping Beacon Hill in a thick, wet fog that muffled sound and blurred the edges of the world. It was perfect cover. Dressed in dark, sound-dampening synthetics, I moved through the sleeping streets like a wraith. My gear was minimal, a slim pack with my tools, climbing rope, and a pair of soft-soled shoes that made no sound. I felt the familiar thrum of adrenaline, a cold, clean fire in my veins. This was the moment of transition, from planning to execution. This was the precipice. I scaled the rear fence at the weak point I'd identified, the old iron groaning softly under my weight. The manor's garden was a tangled mess of thorns and shadows, neglected and wild. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay.
I stood for a full minute, Motionless in the shadow of a gnarled oak, listening.
The house was silent.
A stone monolith breathing in the fog.
The climb was the most dangerous part. I used the thick, woody ivy and the crevices in the brickwork as handholds, moving with a slow, deliberate economy of motion. My fingers, numb with cold, protested, but I ignored them. My focus was singular, the third-floor library window. As I neared it, a gust of wind swirled around me, carrying with it a faint, discordant sound. It was like music, but wrong, a series of atonal notes that seemed to scrape at the inside of my skull. It came from within the house. I paused, my body pressed flat against the cold brick, and listened. The sound faded, replaced by the oppressive silence. The window was, as I'd suspected, unsecured. A testament to the hubris that old money provides. Who would dare climb 3 stories to burgle the Blackwood Manor? I eased the sash upward, the wood sliding with a barely audible whisper. The opening gaped at me like a black mouth, exhaling a gust of stale, cloying air. It smelled of dust, old paper, and something else. Something metallic and vaguely sweet, like old pennies and spoiled fruit. I swung my leg over the sill and slipped inside, my feet landing on the thick Aubusson rug with no more sound than a falling leaf. I was in. The library was a cavern of shadows, the walls lined with ceiling-high shelves crammed with leather-bound books. Moonlight, filtered through the fog, provided a dim, spectral illumination, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed and danced at the edges of my vision. I didn't use a light. My eyes, accustomed to the dark, would adjust. Using a flashlight is like screaming your location in a silent room. I moved toward the center of the room, my destination the large mahogany desk where my research indicated Blackwood conducted his affairs. The dossier said the Oculus was kept in a concealed safe behind a false panel in the wall nearby. My hand instinctively went to the small triangular sigil I had tattooed on my inner wrist years ago, a charm from a superstitious old flame who swore it would ward off ill luck. A foolish trinket, but in moments like this, I found myself tracing its outline. As I passed a tall gilded mirror hanging between 2 bookshelves, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection. And my heart stopped. For a split second, the figure in the mirror wasn't mine. It was taller, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and twisted at unnatural angles. It had no face, only a smooth, pale surface where features should have been. It was a silhouette of absolute negation. I spun around, my muscles tensing for a fight. There was nothing there.
Only the silent row of books and the looming shadow. Maille à ta merde against my rib, a frantic drumbeat in the tombe-like silence.
It was a trick of the light. A hallucination brought on by stress and the eerie atmosphere. It had to be. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the panic down.
Get a grip, Croft, he whispered, the sound alien in the stillness.
I found the hidden panel behind a drab 19th century landscape painting. It clicked open to reveal a modern digital safe, an unexpected complication. Silas's intel was flawed. It took me 20 precious minutes, my sensitive fingertips tracing the faint impressions of fingerprints on the keypad, my ears straining to hear the tumblers click into place through a stethoscope. Every creak of the old house was a footstep. Every gust of wind against the glass was a whisper. The atonal music seemed to return, fainter this time, a phantom melody at the edge of hearing. Finally, with a soft electronic beep, the safe swung open. There it was.
The Oculus of Nyx.
It rested on a bed of black velvet, drinking the dim light from the room and giving nothing back. It was colder than the night air, a circle of pure, abyssal darkness. As my fingers brushed against its silver frame, a jolt, like a static shock, shot up my arm. And with it, a flood of images, chaotic and violent, flashed through my mind. A stone altar slick with blood, faces contorted in silent screams, a great eye opening in a vortex of shadow. I recoiled, snatching my hand back as if burned.
He stumbled backward, my breath hissing through my teeth.
The artifact was more than just an artifact. Silas hadn't just lied by omission. He had sent me into a lion's den for a piece of the lion's heart. I grabbed the oculus, wrapping it in a specially lined cloth for my pack, the cold of it seeming to leach the warmth from my very bones. My priority was now singular: get out. Forget the fee, forget Silas.
Just escape.
I turned back toward the window, my path to freedom. And then I heard it. Not a creak, not a whisper, but the definitive terrifying sound of the massive oak front door slamming shut on the ground floor. A boom that echoed up through the very structure of the house. Heavy, deliberate footsteps began to ascend the main staircase. "I know you're in here," a voice called out, a low, cultured baritone laced with chilling fury. It was Alistair Blackwood.
I saw you on the monitor. Ara, climbing my walls.
Panic, cold and absolute, seized me.
A monitor?
There were no cameras in the dossier.
A hidden, internal system. I was trapped.
My exit was cut off.
I scanned the library, my mind racing.
There was nowhere to hide. The footsteps were getting closer, each one a hammer blow counting down the seconds of my life. "You have taken something that does not belong to you," Blackwood's voice echoed from the second-floor landing, closer now. "There are consequences for such actions. Consequences you cannot begin to fathom." I darted behind the largest of the bookshelves, pressing myself into the narrow gap between the wood and the wall. My heart felt like it would explode. I clutched the wrapped oculus to my chest, its unnatural cold a terrifying weight. The footsteps reached the third floor. They stopped just outside the library door. The doorknob, a heavy brass fist, began to turn with agonizing slowness. I was caught. My life of careful planning, of meticulous control, had ended here, in a dusty, haunted library, a victim of my own greed and the lies of a phantom client.
The door creaked open.
The man who entered the library was the ghost from my surveillance, but flesh and blood and radiating a palpable aura of menace. Alistair Blackwood was dressed in a black silk dressing gown, his silver hair disheveled, his pale face a mask of cold fury. His eyes, a startlingly light shade of gray, scanned the room with an unnerving intensity, as if he could see into the very shadows themselves. He didn't turn on the lights. He seemed more comfortable in the gloom, a creature of the night in his natural habitat. "Hiding is a child's game," he said, his voice a low resonant hum that vibrated in my teeth. "This house sees all. There is no corner dark enough to conceal you from me, or from it." He took a step into the room, and the source of the atonal music became clear. It was coming from him. Not from a device, but from his very presence. A low, discordant hum that seemed to warp the air around him. My muscles screamed at me to run, to fight, to do anything but cower in the darkness, but I was frozen. My professional instincts were useless here. They hadn't prepared me for a man who hummed with the sound of wrongness. He walked to the open safe, his movements fluid and silent. He looked at the empty velvet bed where the oculus had been. He didn't rage. He didn't curse. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. "So you have it," he whispered, almost to himself.
You have no idea what you've done.
"You think you've merely stolen an object of value. You fool. You've accepted a key." He turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping across the bookshelf where I was hidden. For a heart-stopping second, his eyes seemed to lock directly onto mine. I held my breath, the wrapped oculus feeling like a block of ice against my chest. But then his gaze moved on. He was toying with me, a cat with a cornered mouse. "The Order has been seeking a new vessel," he mused, walking toward the large gilded mirror. He ran a long, pale finger across its surface. "Someone with potential."
Someone who can open the door from the other side. Perhaps you are the one.
The Order.
The name sent a chill down my spine.
It connected to Silas, to the ritualistic images that had flooded my mind. This was bigger than a simple theft. It was an occult conspiracy, and I had just stumbled into the center of it. Suddenly, a sound from below distracted him. A faint crash, like breaking glass, from one of the lower floors. Blackwood's head snapped toward the door, his smile vanishing, replaced by a scowl of irritation. "What now?" he hissed. "An uninvited guest." He seemed to be speaking to the mirror. As I watched, horrified, the reflection in the glass moved. It was the same faceless, elongated figure I had seen before. It detached itself from Blackwood's own reflection and drifted across the mirrored surface, a smudge of pure darkness. Blackwood watched it, his expression one of rapt attention, as if receiving a report. "The girl," he finally said, his voice tight with anger.
Impatient.
He turned and stalked out of the library, leaving the door ajar. "Stay where you are, little thief," he called back over his shoulder. "Your part in this has not yet begun." His footsteps receded down the hall, followed by the sound of a door slamming shut somewhere in the distance. I didn't move for a full minute, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen.
The moving réflexion.
The talk of an order and a vessel. A girl. My carefully constructed world of logic and reason had been shattered. I was in a house that obeyed none of the rules, pursued by a man who conversed with monsters in mirrors. The urge to flee was overwhelming.
I crept from my hiding place, every nerve ending screaming.
The window was my only chance. I had to risk it. I moved toward it, my soft-soled shoes making no noise on the rug. But as I reached the center of the room, the library door slammed shut with a deafening bang that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. I spun around, my hand flying to the small canister of pepper spray on my belt, a useless gesture I knew, but a desperate one. The room was empty, but the air had changed. It had grown thick, heavy, and achingly cold. The discordant hum returned, louder now, seeming to come from all directions at once.
Il linged for the window, my finge finding the sash.
I heaved it upwards, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if it had been welded shut. I pulled again, panic lending me a surge of strength, but it was useless. Invisible hands held it firm. "It won't let you leave," a small voice whispered from the shadows near the fireplace.
I whirled around, my hat leaping into my troi.
Huddled in a large wingback chair, almost completely obscured by the darkness, was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 20. She was pale and gaunt, dressed in what looked like a simple white shift. Her dark hair was matted, her feet were bare, and her eyes, large and terrified, were fixed on the glowing mirror. On the back of her hand was a strange, raw-looking brand, a raised pink helix of skin. It was a symbol I recognized with a jolt of sickening familiarity, a triangle inside a pentagon. The same design as the brooch from the original script that inspired this story. No, that wasn't right. The script was a different world. This was real. But the shape, I had seen it somewhere. In a book on esoteric symbols. A mark of binding.
Who are you? I breathed, my voice barely a whisper.
My name is Alara, she said, her voice trembling. And we are both his prisoners now.
What is going on here?
I demanded, my fear momentarily eclipsed by a desperate need for answers. What is that thing in the mirror? He calls it the lector, she said, not taking her eyes off the glowing surface.
The reader of soul. The shadow in the glass.
It's an old entity. Ancient. The Blackwoods have been communing with it for generations. They feed it.
Feed it what?
She finally looked at me, and the despair in her eyes was a physical blow. Fear. Pain.
Life force.
He brought me here to be the final offering, to complete a ritual that will fully merge him with the lector. He wants to become a god. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity.
Alistair.
The Order of the Veiled Eye. The Oculus, it wasn't just a scrying mirror, it was a key, a focus for the ritual. And Alara was the sacrifice. The crash I'd heard downstairs, that was her, trying to escape. He's been holding me for weeks, she continued, her voice breaking.
In the cellar.
I managed to pick the lock on my cell while he was. distracted. I was trying to find a way out when you arrived. He said you were impatient, I recalled. She nodded. The ritual is tonight, at the apex of the new moon. He thinks your arrival is a sign, an unexpected catalyst. He said the lector was drawn to your aura.
My blood ran cold.
He wants to use me as part of the ritual. He wants to use your body as the gateway, she corrected grimly. He will sacrifice me to the lector on the altar, but he will use the oculus to channel the entity's power through you. Your life force will be the conduit that opens the door between worlds. Alistair will step through, shed his mortality, and bond with the lector on the other side.
You will just be the anti-shell left behind.
The horror of it was absolute. I wasn't just going to be killed. I was going to be used as a spiritual explosive device, my soul the fuel for a madman's ascension to godhood.
Suddenly, the light from the mirror intensified, and the atonal grew to a deafening pitch.
Inside the glass, the shadow figure, the lector, began to coalesce. It grew larger, its form sharpening, its featureless face turning toward us. It raised one of its impossibly long, thin arms and pressed its hand against the inside of the glass. A network of black, web-like cracks spread across the mirrored surface from the point of contact. "It's coming," Elara whispered, her face ashen. I had to do something. My mind, trained for escape and evasion, raced through the options. The door was supernaturally locked. The window was sealed. That left one choice: confrontation. It was insane. It was suicide. But it was better than waiting to be a holy hand grenade. "What's his weakness?" I asked, my voice tight. "Everyone has one." "The Blackwoods have always controlled the lector through mirrors," she said, her mind working alongside mine. "They summon it through them, bind it to them. Its connection to this world is entirely dependent on reflective surfaces. Without them, it is powerless here." An idea, desperate and insane, began to form in my mind. "This room is full of them," I said, glancing at the gilded mirror, the glass on the bookshelves, the polished silver inkwell on the desk. "And the oculus you're holding is the most powerful of them all," she added, her eyes locking onto the cloth-wrapped object in my hand. "It's a pure conduit.
A direct line."
"Then we need to break them," I said, a wild resolve hardening in my chest. "All of them." Before Elara could respond, the large mirror exploded outward, showering the room in a cascade of glittering shards. Standing in the now empty frame, wreathed in a shimmering haze of black energy, was the lector. It was even more terrifying in person. A 7-foot-tall silhouette of animated shadow, its form constantly shifting and roiling like smoke. It had no eyes, but I felt its gaze on me, a cold, hungry intelligence that scraped at my sanity. It let out a sound that was not a sound, a psychic scream composed of 1,000 voices, all shrieking in agony. It was the sound of every soul the creature had ever consumed.
My mind reeled.
The room seemed to tilt, the shadows stretching and contorting into leering demonic faces. The instinct to curl up into a ball and wait for the end was almost overpowering. But then I saw Elara. She wasn't cowering. She had pushed herself out of the chair and was standing, her small frame trembling but defiant. On her face was not just fear, but a burning righteous anger. That look, that sheer force of will, snapped me out of my terror. "The desk!" I yelled, pointing to the massive mahogany piece.
"Tip it over."
"Use it as cover." We both lunged for it. The lector drifted toward us, its movements unervingly smooth and silent. As it passed one of the bookshelves, the glass door shattered without being touched. We heaved the heavy desk onto its side, the wood groaning in protest. We dove behind it just as the creature reached our position. A shadowy tendril lashed out, passing through the space where my head had been seconds before. The air it touched grew instantly cold, and frost bloomed on the spines of the books behind us. Huddled behind the desk, the world reduced to the sounds of my own ragged breathing and Elara's, I felt the icy weight of the oculus in my pack. It was the key. It was the anchor. Alistair wanted to use it to let the lector in. Maybe I could use it to kick it out. I have a plan, I said, my voice shaking. It's probably going to get us killed. I was going to die anyway, Elara replied, a grim smile touching her lips.
Iderater die fighting.
Her courage was infectious. I was no hero. I was a thief who had stumbled into a nightmare far beyond his comprehension. But in that moment, hiding behind a mahogany desk with a condemned girl, facing a monster from the abyss, I knew I couldn't just be a thief anymore.
Mai fateres cynical word echoed in my head.
You can wrap it in silk words, son. For the first time, I wanted to be more than the words.
He wanted to be the man who walked out of this house alive.
And I wasn't going to leave her behind. The lector didn't attack us directly. It played. It drifted around our makeshift barricade, its shadowy form casting no reflection in the thousands of mirror shards littering the floor. It was testing us, savoring our fear. A low, continuous whisper emanated from it, a sibilant chorus of temptations and threats that wormed its way into my mind. It spoke of my failures, of my solitary life, of the futility of resistance. It promised me wealth beyond measure, power, escape, if only I would surrender the oculus. If only I would give in. Don't listen to it, Elara hissed, her hands pressed against her ears. It finds the cracks in your soul and pours poison into them. I gritted my teeth, trying to focus. My plan, I said, forcing the words out. You said its power is tied to mirrors.
The oculus is the strongest link.
What if we overload it? What if we give it exactly what it wants, but all at once? Elara looked at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. You want to use it? To actively channel the lector? No, I corrected. I want to create a feedback loop. Force all of its energy into one single point, the oculus, and then shatter it. Break the connection.
Like cutting the power core on a machine.
The energy backlash could kill us both, she said, her voice flat. It could level this entire house. It's better than being a sole battery for that thing, I countered, nodding toward the shifting shadow. We need a distraction. And we need to find the main altar. The ritual's focus. That's where its power will be most concentrated. I know where it is, she said.
In the sub-basement. A hidden chamber behind the wine cellar.
That's where he was taking me. From down the hall, we heard Alistair's voice, raised in a furious, booming incantation. The words were in a language I didn't recognize, harsh and guttural. The house began to vibrate, a low thrum that resonated deep in my bones. The ritual was starting. Alistair was calling to his dark god, unaware that it was already upstairs, playing with its food. He's trying to summon it, Elara whispered. He doesn't know it's already free. That's our distraction, I said, my mind racing. He's concentrating. He thinks we're trapped up here. We have to get to that altar. Now. We peeked over the top of the desk. The lector was hovering over the spot where the gilded mirror had been, its form pulsing in time with Alistair's chanting. It seemed to be drawing power from the ritual, its shadowy form becoming darker, more solid. On 3, I whispered.
We run for the door. Don't look back.
I didn't wait for a reply. 3. I yelled, and we bolted. We scrambled over the desk and sprinted for the library door. The lector let out its chorus of screams, a wave of psychic force that washed over me, making my head spin and my stomach churn. I felt a piercing cold at my back as one of its tendrils grazed my jacket. I didn't falter. We burst out into the hallway and I slammed the heavy oak door shut behind us.
Ik knew it wouldn't hold the creature for long.
The hallway was dark, but the entire house was now lit by a faint, pulsing red glow that seemed to emanate from the floors below. The chanting was louder here. We raced for the main staircase. As we descended, The architecture of the house seemed to shift around us. Hallways stretched into impossible lengths, portraits on the walls warped, their painted eyes following us with malevolent glee. The house itself was alive, twisted by the Lecter's presence and Alistair's ritual. We reached the ground floor and found our way to the kitchen, then to a narrow door that led to the cellar stairs. The air grew colder as we descended, the smell of damp earth and wine mixing with that same sickly sweet scent of decay I'd noticed when I first entered the house. The wine cellar was a maze of dusty racks and cobweb-draped bottles. At the far end, behind a false wall of stone, was a rough-hewn iron door. It was slightly ajar. "This is it," Ilara said, her breath misting in the cold air. The chanting was deafening now. We peered through the gap. The chamber beyond was like something from a fever dream. It was circular, the walls of rough black stone covered in faintly glowing sigils. In the center of the room, on a raised dais, was a massive stone altar, its surface stained dark with old blood. Alistair Blackwood stood before it, his back to us, his arms raised to the ceiling. He was no longer wearing the silk dressing gown. His torso was bare, covered in a complex lacework of scars and ritual tattoos that seemed to writhe in the crimson light. The red glow was coming from the sigils on the walls, and more intensely, from the altar itself. He was so engrossed in his incantation that he hadn't noticed our arrival. But something else was in the room with him. Floating above the altar was a miniature version of the Lecter, a swirling vortex of shadow no bigger than a man's head. It was a focal point, an anchor. Alistair was trying to summon the main entity into this prepared vessel. He's creating a new mirror, I realized. A mirror of pure energy. We have to stop him before the Lecter gets down here, Ilara urged. If they merge, it will be unstoppable.
He pulled the oculus from my pack.
The cloth it was wrapped in was stiff with frost. Unveiling it, the cold intensified tenfold. The obsidian surface was no longer a void. It was a swirling vortex of shadow, mirroring the one above the altar. It pulsed with a hungry, malevolent energy. Holding it was like holding a black hole in my hands. "I need to get close to the altar," I said. "When I give the signal, you need to break his concentration.
Do anything."
Yell, throw something, just snap him out of it for a second." She nodded, her face pale but determined. She picked up a heavy, empty wine bottle from a nearby rack. I took a deep breath, the foul air burning my lungs.
He hugged the shadow at the edge of the chamber, moving slowly, deliberately, towards the day.
The whispers from the Lecter upstairs were a faint but constant pressure in my mind. But down here, Alistair's chanting was the dominant force. The words scraped and clawed at the fabric of reality. I was halfway to the altar when the iron door behind us flew off its hinges and crashed against the far wall. The real Lecter filled the doorway, its full terrifying form blotting out the light from the cellar. It let out its soul-shattering shriek.
Alistair faltered.
He turned, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. He saw the Lecter in the doorway, then his gaze fell on me, standing in the shadows, holding the oculus. For a moment, he looked like a child whose favorite toy had been broken. Then, his face twisted into a mask of pure, incandescent rage. "You!" he roared, his voice cracking.
"You've ruined everything. He will flay the flesh from your bones."
The miniature Lecter above the altar dissipated, its energy flowing back into the main creature in the doorway. The red light from the sigils flickered and died. The ritual was broken.
"Now, Ilara."
I screamed. She didn't hesitate. With a primal cry of rage, she hurled the wine bottle.
It flew through the air and shattered against the side of Alistair's head.
He staggered, a dark gash opening on his temple. He stumbled back, his hands flying to the wound, his concentration completely shattered. That was my chance. I lunged forward, sprinting the remaining distance to the altar.
The Lecter surged into the room, a wave of absolute darkness.
I leaped onto the dais, placing myself between the creature and the stunned Alistair. I held the oculus up, its flat surface facing the approaching monster.
You want it.
I yelled, my voice raw with terror and adrenaline. Then take it. I poured every ounce of my will, my fear, my anger, into the object. I didn't try to control the energy. I just opened the floodgates. The oculus responded instantly. The swirling vortex within it blazed to life, becoming a perfect, stable replica of the lector itself. The creature paused, its advance halted. It seemed to recognize its own reflection, its own essence, trapped in the obsidian glass. A connection, powerful and undeniable, formed between the two. The lector's shadowy form began to flow toward the oculus, not as an attack, but as a river flowing into the sea. It was being drawn in, its energy siphoned into the mirror.
The oculus grew impossibly cold, the chill sinking into my bones.
The air in the chamber crackled with raw power. The stone walls began to groan and crack under the strain. Alistair, recovering his senses, watched with a look of horror. "No," he screamed.
You don't know what you're doing. You'll destroy us all.
He lunged for me, but Alara was there first. She grabbed a heavy rusted iron chain from the wall, likely the one that had held her captive, and swung it like a whip. It wrapped around Alistair's legs, sending him crashing to the floor. The lector was almost completely absorbed into the oculus. The mirror was vibrating so violently I could barely hold it. It glowed with a black light that seemed to swallow the very world around it. My vision swam. My body screamed in protest. I felt my life force being drained, pulled into the vortex along with the creature. This was it.
The feedback loop.
Now I just had to cut the cord.
Et Lara. Il manageait de tout choc out.
The altar. I didn't need to say more.
She understood.
As Alistair struggled to untangle himself from the chains, she grabbed a loose piece of stone from the crumbling wall and with all her might, slammed it down onto the blood-stained surface of the altar. With my last ounce of strength, I raised the vibrating, screaming oculus high above my head and brought it crashing down onto the same spot.
Obsidian mais stone.
The world went white. The sound was the opposite of an explosion. It was a moment of absolute deafening silence, a sonic vacuum where all noise ceased to exist. Then, reality snapped back into place with the force of a thunderclap. A concussive wave of pure energy erupted from the point of impact, throwing me backward off the dais.
Hit the stone floor hard, the air knocked from my lung.
The last thing I saw before my vision went dark was the chamber crumbling, the ceiling collapsing, and Alistair Blackwood letting out a final agonizing scream as he was buried under tons of rock and earth.
He awoke to the smell of smoke and the sound of crackling flame.
My head was pounding, and every inch of my body ached. I pushed myself up, my vision blurry. The ritual chamber was gone, completely caved in. The sub-basement was on fire, the ancient wooden wine racks burning like tinder. The fire was spreading fast, crawling up the cellar stairs.
Julien.
Alara was kneeling beside me, her face smudged with soot, her eyes wide with urgency. She was shaking my shoulder. "We have to go. The whole house is coming down." She helped me to my feet, and we staggered through the choking smoke, my arm slung over her shoulder. The oculus was gone, shattered into a million pieces, its dark energy dissipated. The lector was gone. The unnatural cold was gone, replaced by a searing, suffocating heat. The house was no longer a supernatural entity. It was just a building, dying in fire and smoke. We stumbled up the cellar stairs and through the ground floor.
The shifting, malvol architecture was gone.
The hallways were just hallways, now filled with fire. We burst out the massive front door, no longer locked by unseen forces, and into the blessed cold night air of Beacon Hill. We didn't stop.
We ran, hand in hand, leaving the inferno behind us. The street was chaos.
The glow of the fire had painted the fog-draped sky orange. Neighbors in dressing gowns were spilling out of their homes, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. In the distance, the first wail of approaching sirens cut through the night. No one noticed the two soot-covered figures slipping away into the shadows, disappearing into the labyrinthine cobblestone streets. We walked for what felt like miles in silence, until the sounds of the sirens and the glow of the fire were a faint memory. We ended up on the banks of the Charles River, the cool breeze a balm on our scorched skin.
The city lights of Cambridge glittered across the water.
It felt like another world. Ilara sat on a cold stone bench, wrapping her arms around herself. She wasn't crying. Her face was a mask of exhaustion, but her eyes held a new light.
Not hope, not yet.
But a kind of fierce, hard-won peace. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice raspy from the smoke. "I think so," I said, slumping down beside her. My body felt broken, but my mind felt strangely clear. The whispers were gone. The oppressive weight of the Manor's evil had lifted.
Blackwood is gone. The lector is gone.
"They'll find his body in the rubble," she said.
The police.
"They'll have questions." "Let them ask," I replied. "The official story will be faulty wiring in an old house. A tragic accident. No one will ever know what really happened here tonight." I had so many questions for her. About the brand on her hand, about how she knew so much about the lector, about who she was before Alistair had taken her. But looking at her, I knew this wasn't the time. She had earned her silence.
What will you do now?
I asked instead. She looked out over the dark water. My family has enemies. The Order of the Veiled Eye is more than just Alistair Blackwood. He was just one branch of a very old tree. They took me because my bloodline has a certain resistance to their kind of influence. They wanted to study it, pervert it, before sacrificing me.
She touched the brand on her hand.
This was their mark of ownership. Now, it's a reminder. She stood up, her small frame silhouetted against the city lights. I have to disappear. Start over. Somewhere they won't find me. She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a genuine small smile on her face.
You saved my life, Julian Croft.
The thief who became a hero. I was just trying to save my own skin, I said, a weak laugh escaping my lips. Maybe, she said, but you didn't leave me behind. That's the part that matters. She reached out and lightly touched the triangular tattoo on my wrist. That old charm. It seems you had some luck after all. She hesitated for a moment, then leaned in and pressed a quick, chaste kiss on my cheek. It was as light as a moth's wing.
Be careful, Julian.
People like Mr. Silas don't just go away. The oculus was important to them. They'll come looking for it. Or for the person who was last seen with it. With that final chilling warning, she turned and walked away, melting into the shadows of the esplanade until she was gone. I was alone again. I didn't follow her. She deserved her peace, her chance to start a new life out from under the shadow of the Blackwoods and their order.
He sat there for a long time, watching the river flow, feeling the ashen bruise settle into my bones.
My pack was still slung over my shoulder. It felt impossibly light. I had gone into that house to retrieve a priceless artifact for an obscene amount of money. I was leaving with nothing but a few burns, a head full of nightmares, and a warning. A thought came to me then, a piece of my father's cynical wisdom, but twisted into a new shape. When you've got what you came to get, you leave.
Yadente gotan the oculus. Yadente gotan the money.
But as I pushed myself to my feet and started the long walk back to my rented room, back to a life I wasn't sure I recognized anymore, I realized I had gotten something.
A second chance.
A life I hadn't expected to keep. And in the silent, haunted spaces of the world, sometimes that's the only treasure worth stealing. The contract was broken, the house was ash, and I was free. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me more than any ghost, that the Order of the Veiled I was still out there, and they would be looking for me. My solitary business had just gotten a lot more complicated.